Hello and welcome to BSG Webinars. I'm your host, Dan Carney. Whether this is your first webinar or you've watched them all, I'd like to thank you for taking the time to join us today. Sustainability, how Kerry's sustainability calculator can aid your brewery, is our 28th episode since the start of our webinar series. So if you haven't seen any of the past webinars, please visit YouTube and search for BSG Craft. There you'll find all of our past webinars as well as other great content from all our wonderful suppliers, so be sure to check them out. For future webinars, a link can be found on our homepage at bsgcraftbrewing.com and bsgcanada.com. We also announce them in our newsletter, which is the best way to learn about new products and important information, so please sign up if you haven't already. You can also follow us on Instagram, Facebook, LinkedIn, and we usually post daily. We do giveaways, all kinds of things. So join us there as well if you're on those social media channels. So as we enjoy the summer months, we've taken a bit of a break from webinars, but I can assure you that we will be back to a regular schedule post-CBC in the second half of September. In fact, we'll be kicking it off with our annual hop class, Humulus U. That will be 4 webinars over a 2-week span. Like last year, we'll be bringing it to you digitally, so keep an eye out for those to be announced soon. Like I said, you'll hear about them first in our newsletter, so sign up. All right, today's webinar, I have Amanda and Eoin, and they will give us a presentation, a run-through of the sustainability calculator, and then we'll do a Q&A right after the presentation. So if you have any questions during the presentation, direct them to the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen, and we'll answer them in the order that they are received. So now let's welcome our guests. I'd like to welcome Amanda Wolff and Eoin Lalor from Kerry. Hi, Amanda.
Hi, Dan. Thanks for that intro. Happy to be here today. So I am one of Kerry's beverage marketers on the team. And my role specifically consists of partnering closely with our strategic marketers and marketing insights function to translate kind of consumer insights and what is happening in the category for our customers. I'm excited to be here. Eoin, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody, and hi, Dan. Nice to meet you again, and indeed all of your customers here throughout North America. It's nice to be back online with you guys again. So certainly looking forward to as interactive a meeting and presentation with them today as what we had the last time. So good to be back on board again.
Yeah, thanks for joining us again, and thanks for coming on today, Amanda. So why don't we jump in and have you start sharing your presentation. I'm going to send out a poll real quick. And all right, so basically we're asking, which of the following Kerry products do you use in your brewery? It's a multiple choice question. This will just help us direct when Eoin kind of goes through the calculator and does an example of kind of which products he should select when filling out the calculator. And I'm sure you'll do like more than one run through of it, but we'll see what wins the prize today. Oh, and we got Wolff and Biofine are the 2 most popular today. So I will...
Great selections, I must say, and they'll fit very nicely into our demonstration.
Perfect. All right. Well, I will let you guys take over, and I'll join you back on the Q&A section on the other side.
All right. Thanks, Dan. So whenever we talk about sustainability at Kerry, we always talk about how, I think in previous years, sustainability, whether it's, making sure that your packaging is recyclable or sustainably sourcing ingredients, any of those call outs. In the previous years, I think it was a really kind of nice to have a product differentiator. But now what we're seeing in terms of responses from consumers and growing launches in the marketplaces, it's really kind of a must-have for consumers. And we look today at what we're kind of calling the and consumer, and they're really reshaping the food and beverage industry. So When we say and, we literally mean, a consumer is looking for food and beverages that taste great and they offer new and different experiences, and they're healthy and nutritious. They have cleaner labels and they might offer some sort of functional benefit, and the ingredients are easy to understand. They trust the brand. They can trace the ingredients to their sourcing, and they're ethically and environmentally sourced, which means you either are giving back or doing good for the planet, or at least not harming the planet. And also, how are you helping people? How are you supporting livelihood of farmers or folks working in the industry that are sourcing your raw materials? And the products are made for me, so they feel customized, they feel tailored for me, and they're easily accessible. I'm willing to pay a little bit more for premium ingredients, but can I find these products? Are they more premium so that I know I'm getting the best bang for my buck? And they're shareable. So we look, especially now more than ever in this social media age, we look to our friends and our families and people that we follow, even influencers on social, for new product recommendations. And we tend to share those, both the good and the bad experiences as well. So the craft beer consumer is really a consumer, I think, that embodies a lot of this end consumer that we're talking about. So really, craft brewing allowed for more of a story behind the brewing process and behind the beers that consumers were able to drink. So it allowed the consumer to feel more connected to the brand and to the beers that they're consuming. It also allowed them to kind of feel closer to the process, with craft breweries and distilleries offering tours really all over the nation. Consumers can really feel invested in or part of the process as they, kind of watch which part flavors are added and why certain processes are done at this time, and the differences that can have in the end effect or taste of the product. Again, craft beer drinkers tend to value more premium ingredients. So they might be willing to pay a little bit more because they value kind of the story behind the ingredients. They value that traceability, and they value kind of more premium flavor experiences and more premium ingredients that they're consuming. And we know that across the board with food and beverages, consumers are really wanting to have a positive impact on the environment through their everyday actions. And that includes the food and beverages that they're consuming. When we look at sustainable brewing market examples, so you might be sitting there thinking as a craft brewer, okay, well, how can I get in on this? How can I offer consumers the traceability and the stories that they're looking for? And I think there's no one answer. So if you look at the top right corner there, it can be, a big brand that I think we all recognize, Coors Seltzer. So Molson Coors gives back, gallons of fresh water to restore our rivers to help combat climate change with each purchase of a 12-pack of Coors Seltzer. New Belgium Brewery last year made headlines when it became the first major brewery to achieve carbon neutral certification, again, combating climate change. But then you can see some of these smaller brewers making headlines as well, or becoming known. Mountain Tap, buys their materials and their ingredients from local small scale growers. So they're also helping give back and then responsibly sourcing and supporting the livelihood of people as well. Alice Springs is actually an Australian example, but I thought it was really cool that they reduce water consumption and even collect any wastewater that they use to kind of water their lawns and gardens and help clean equipment. So they're really contributing to that circular economy and helping combat climate change that way. Crazy Dingo Brewing in Fort Myers, Florida. They're really bringing that farm to brew experience for craft drinkers by using local ingredients. They also use groundwater from below their farm to purify their carbon filters that are also made from coconut husks. So lots of cool things happening there. And then finally, you've got Alaskan Brewing Company, been around for a while, and they use a CO2 recovery program to help clean emissions that are used in production. So I think it's important to think broadly at first, about the ways that you can make an impact in your sourcing, in your process, And then also make that story known to your end consumer because they definitely are interested in that information. And then we know that with global warming, craft brewers were facing a rise in production costs just because of poor grain quality. And then we also know that in the past couple of years, again, this is sustainable products are really becoming a must-have for consumers. So we're up to 89%. That's almost all of consumers that expect companies to invest in sustainability efforts, which is up from 65% just a few years ago. And then, of course, we're just sort of coming out of the pandemic here, which also had an impact on the brewing industry, especially, I think, the craft industry. Lots of food service establishments shutting down, and that really kind of disrupted things, and then really has brewers, I think, focused on cutting costs and making processes more efficient wherever possible. So at Kerry, we are looking to really help the craft brewers reduce costs, improve their process, and then achieve any sustainability targets that they're working toward while still brewing a delicious and quality premium craft beer. And we're hoping to help you do that by helping with the ingredients that you're choosing and the raw materials that you're using, helping you figure out ways to improve your process efficiencies that can often also reduce costs, as well as reduce the energy consumption. And then as the title suggests, and as Dan has alluded to, we also have developed a sustainable brewing calculator that can really help you quantify the impact that you're making, so that you can not only see and measure the impact that you're making, but also, again, pass that story and that information along to the end consumer who's drinking your beer. And now I am going to turn it over to my colleague, Eoin, who is going to walk us through some of the ingredients and then demo the calculator for us.
Great, and thank you very much for that introduction, Amanda. It really covered it excellently. So I suppose what I would say by way of introduction to this slide, guys, is that obviously in the food industry, in terms of this sustainability message, we'll all have heard of the term farm to fork. And indeed, we saw the crazy dingo guys there talking about farm to brew. I suppose this is the Kerry view that I've taken, and I suppose the term that I use here, and it probably shows my training and background in the English and British brewing industry. This is probably what I would call our field to firkin view of the process. So it really is taking that holistic view of the process, looking at the grain, and indeed any type of grain that comes into the process, taking it all the ways through the brewing process, and then, of course, facing the consumer into all of the new product developments that we can be talking about. Obviously, Amanda mentioned there if you like, the massive growth in the whole area around hard seltzers and everything. So what we've done is we've looked at all of these processes, individual steps, inputs in it, and we've looked at the technologies that we can offer into that. And I suppose it makes for that perfect marriage with ourselves and BSG when we look at this process, that we can say that we can deal with every single stage of that process and offer technical solutions, and probably more importantly, the backup knowledge and understanding behind those technical solutions to deliver that real strong sustainability message, not only in terms of the solutions that we provide, but more importantly, I would say, in terms of the operation that you guys in the brewing community run, so that you can be part of that message in terms of not only are the ingredients and process aids that you're using in your process coming with a strong sustainability message, but they're also carrying through and delivering on that promise into the products that you're going to deliver to your consumers. So we've taken that view. We've looked at the various raw material inputs, the various stages. So we're looking at obviously enzymes and materials like that for optimization of the extract delivery that we get out of the brew house and the mashing. We've looked at downstream process control in terms of controlling overfoaming, clarifying the work with products like Wolff, dealing to better clarity, better yields as we go through the process. Then optimizing on the fermentation side of the process, maybe speeding up the sedimentation of yeast, removing it with biofine, controlling overfoaming or indeed foam head capacity in fermenters and optimizing, if you will, tank utilization and indeed all the energy inputs in terms of heating and cooling that might be involved around that. And then finally, working to develop really new interesting products in terms of great tasting products, unique ingredients in terms of potential different types of hops bittering, different flavor extracts, all again sustainably sourced. So again, right from start to finish, delivering a very strong sustainable message. So if we just move quickly there, Amanda, on to the next slide. So in terms of that message, what we can see here, and this is just a very brief snapshot of it, if we look at a bioglucanase enzyme, what we've looked at here is taking a typical model of maybe a 1 million barrel hectoliter or something like that, but equally it will apply to any volume of a brewery that we look at. You know, we could look at the enzyme in terms of increasing the extract yield that we get out of our malt, or indeed if we have a combination of malt and another adjunct, we can relate that to the carbon footprint of the raw material coming into the process. So we're basically generating, if you will, more beer from a set tonnage of grain. So there, when we look at this particular example, we're looking at CO2 emissions reduction of the order of 125 US tons per annum. That's the equivalent of taking a standard family car, saying it's doing maybe 15,000 miles per annum. That's looking at taking maybe 29 cars off the road for 1 year. In terms of the process, we're looking at about a 0.5% reduction in CO2 per hectoliter, per barrel of beer produced, and equally about a 0.3% energy reduction per barrel of beer produced. Likewise with the Wolff lock, and here what we're looking at is we're concentrating on what technology benefits that we get from the Wolff lock. So we're looking at improved trub compaction. As a result of that improved trub compaction, we're looking at better, brighter worts, higher yields in terms of wort going into fermentation. And indeed, further downstream, we're looking at a reduced load going onto the filter. So when we add up all of those, we're looking at impacts right across the process from the, if you will, maybe the whirlpool where we might add it in, right to the filter plant. And there we can quantify this in terms of CO2 impact, but equally we can put a cost saving on it in terms of those processes. And here, based on some of the many examples that we would have from breweries throughout the world, we're saying somewhere of the order of about 10 US cents per barrel of beer produced. Again, similar message when we look at firm cap. Here we're talking about increasing, if you will, the tank capacity in real time and increasing tank utilization. So again, there's going to be benefits there in terms of cleaning costs, chilling costs, etc. Hop utilization, another very useful benefit that we see with firm cap. And indeed, what we know from the many trials that we've done throughout the world, we can see hop utilization benefits improve by anywhere between 7 to 15%, because essentially what we're doing is we're holding, if you will, the hop and the converted hop in the body of the beer rather than losing it in that foam head that might be generated in the fermenter. Again, the unusual benefit that we get here is that even though we're using an anti-foam in the process, because we preserve the beer foam, it's not lost in the foam that's generated in the fermenter, but it carries through into the final beer and final beer pack. So it's an unusual situation where we get an improved beer foam stability in the final product. And finally, we can, because we reduce that foam head height in the fermenter, we can actually switch on and recover CO2 recovery earlier because it reaches that critical purity earlier in the process. So again, many benefits that we can see around it. And again, we have calculated a cost based on many brewery trials related to this. Likewise, with fining agents, in particular here, Biofine Clear, we're looking at the impact on, if you will, speeding up the maturation fermentation process, particularly with regard to yeast sedimentation and removal of the yeast. The benefit that we get in that is not only time in terms of chilling and cooling, but also in terms of the load that goes onto the filter. And again, there are significant benefits there in terms of filtration run optimization, reduction in filter rate, reduction in waste to landfill, things like that. So again, we have calculated based again on many brewery experiences, a cost roughly in the order of $8 per barrel. And finally, when we look at yeast X, quite an interesting one, maybe not so much of interest to those brewers who might be out there using 100% malt. But as that level of adjunct increases, or indeed specifically if we look at what is, as we mentioned already, the growing hard seltzer market in North America, a specific yeast food used in the fermenter can significantly impact on alcohol yields, reducing overall fermentation times. So again, there are benefits there in terms of CO2 reduction, energy reduction, and indeed alcohol yields. And again, we can put costs and CO2 benefits to that. So a rough snapshot of what the process can deliver. So again, if we go to the next slide there, please, Amanda. So this then is sort of summarizing that if we take the standard model that we've built the calculator on, looking at maybe a 1 million hectoliter or a 1 million barrel operation. When we add all that up, not only are we saying here that, you know, there's a significant sustainability benefit that we can bring to the brewery, but it doesn't have to cost you to do the right thing. And what we're saying here is that there are significant cost savings involved with using these products. So not only do they themselves have an insignificant impact on the carbon footprint of the process per se as themselves, they will significantly reduce the carbon footprint of the overall output of the process, but they also will allow the brewer save costs, save money. So it's not only are you doing the right thing, but you're saving money in the process. And that's just a rough sample there of some of the calculations we've done around that in terms of impacts when you're looking at unmalted adjuncts, hop utilizations, plant cost efficiencies. With that will obviously come energy and water reduction, and then finally filter rate reduction, as I would have mentioned. If we move on to the next slide then, please, Amanda. So this is just to give you an overview of how we've built up the model. What we've done here is we've taken a standard brewery size here of 1 million barrels, or indeed 1 million hectoliters. But you'll be happy to know that when you go onto the calculator, it's not just limited to that. You can go right from a 25,000 barrel operation up to a 10 million barrel operation. So the model is very flexible, but the model is built on very solid principles. In the model, we've restricted ourselves initially to 100% malt. If we're looking at higher levels of adjunct, we can adjust the model to take that in. Likewise, we're looking at a typical operation. Maybe we're looking at a high gravity brew here, 18 Plato is what we've taken. And typically the model we've looked at is maybe a brew house throwing out of the order of 500 hectoliters, 425 barrels. But again, as I said, the model can be scaled up or down accordingly. Typically, when we look at downstream optimization, we have taken into account a dual tank operation. So that's where we've separate vessels for fermentation and maturation. So then that's obviously important when we look at where and how products like biofine, etc., are added into the process. Filtration, again, the example we've taken here is standard plate and frame filtration, where we're using filter rate so we can calculate the impact of the different technologies on filter rate consumption. And we have taken, and this again is based on information acquired through and analyzing what's going on globally in the industry, and taking a few separate models looking at what the average sort of carbon footprint per hectoliter or barrel of beer produced would be. And this is taking here the figure of 18.21 pounds per hectoliter per barrel in this case. But again, we know within the brewing industry, there will be some operations that will have levels significantly lower in this. Equally, there will be some operations that are significantly higher. But again, for working the model as it is at the moment, we've picked a standardized level. But again, we can adjust working with individual breweries on theirs. And then we have made the assumption that typical operations will be typically of the order of 25% electricity, 75% natural gas. Again, going back into the model, we can change those ratios. If we look on the right-hand side, what we've looked at, sorry, Amanda, we've looked at just a pie chart in terms of the key outputs, in terms of the key energy and carbon contributors to that process in terms of the life cycle analysis of beer. Clearly, packaging, refrigeration, distribution, huge contributors. But what we've done in our model is we've focused our attention on where we can bring sustainability benefits. So here we're looking at raw materials, brewing operation processes, and waste management. So in terms of the technologies that we've built into the model, we've measured the benefit in these key areas: raw material brewing and waste management. Next slide there, please, Amanda. And this is taking the example of Biofine Clear, some of the details behind that. So we would have made some assumptions based on the dose rate you can see there, added at the end of fermentation. What we've said here is for a typical process of maybe 168 hours, we can reduce it by 24 hours. So there we have roughly a 14% reduction in maturation time. Some of our numbers are also showing filtration cycles improvement of up to 50%, and that's because we can reduce the loading going onto the filter. Again, within the model, we can adjust those impacts, but for the model on the calculator, we've roughly calculated in around a 50% reduction. 1% reduction in beer losses associated with that improvement of filter aid operations or filter operations. And equally, because of the overall benefits in terms of volumes, recoveries, etc., what we factored in there is about a 5% reduction in terms of CIP operations, and that can be the chemicals, etc., going into CIP. And then what you see on the graph on the right is when you plug that into the model, it actually throws out, and this would be the hard model that we built the calculator on, would be the hard numbers at each step of the process. So clearly here, the Biofine is having its impact on maturation. The small graph in the middle there with a value of 0.023 is the net input related to the Biofine itself. So you can see the carbon footprint of the Biofine, its dose rate going into the process is minimal. Where the real benefits are is the amount of carbon it helps take out of the process through improving process efficiencies. And that's captured, as I said, in terms of maturation reduction times, energy inputs required in around that. That could be down to filtration operations, centrifugation, chilling and cooling, etc., things like that. So that's just a very detailed snapshot of one particular technology and how we end up with the overall values that we feed in to help us build the calculator model. So if you move on to the next slide there, please, Amanda. And this is an interesting slide because I think everybody on the call here who's using any of these technologies can probably take a bow and a pat on the back to say they're part of these numbers and values. And what we've done here is we've looked at a typical year in terms of the various products that we would supply into the North American craft brewing industry. What we've done is, knowing the various dose rates, etc., of these, we've sort of brought that back into the calculator and said, well, based on these volumes of products and dose rates, we estimate this is the, if you will, the amount of beer produced per annum by the craft industry in North America, where we're having a positive impact. And it really does make for some very interesting numbers in that, you know, we're looking at an overall reduction of about 81 million pounds per annum CO2. And what that converts to in terms of what the man on the street might relate to is 496,000 trees planted per annum, 8,000 family cars taken off the year per annum. And indeed, in terms of those brewery cost calculations, it could represent an overall saving to that accumulated brewing industry, if you will, of about $3.8 million dollars per annum. So it's just another way of looking at getting that top line view in terms of what we as Kerry and hopefully BSG are contributing. But as I said, all the customers out there using these technologies, they're part of those numbers. So if we move on to the next slide then, please, Amanda, I think this is where we can actually demonstrate how the model works. And I think if we go back to the poll that Dan did there at the start, I think it was Wolff and Biofine were the two key technologies. So we might use that as an example. So if we take maybe, Amanda, as a typical brewery size and if we consider it from the craft brewing industry perspective, maybe we'll go with maybe 50,000 barrels or something like that. And so we select the barrels, and then it was, I think we said Wolff and Biofine were the two technologies that scored highest. So if we put that, and then we quantify our impact, we just need to put in again the 50,000. And what we can see there is, in terms of that impact, what's that saying is in a 50,000 barrel brewery using Wolff and Biofine at the sort of recommended dose rates or the dose rates we put into the model, we're potentially going to deliver a saving of 64 US short tons per annum, and 8% energy reduction in the brewhouse operations. That CO2 equivalent in cars taken off the road is about 13. And then in terms of trees planted, about 780. And what we've calculated, apologies, some of you may hear my dog barking in the background. What that calculates out in terms of potential cost savings is about $5,500 per annum. So I think for our customers out there, or you guys out there interested in looking at this, what it does do is it just allows you to generate that nice message for your consumers in terms of when they sit down to drink a pint or a glass of your IPA, that you can say, well, this is what I've calculated is the saving that I'm doing in terms of doing the right thing from a brewing perspective in terms of reducing the overall impact that that beer has on the environment. So hopefully that gives you a good snapshot of what we do in that regard. And if you key down there, Amanda, maybe a bit through that picture, we can see when you go into the model, you can see the baseline assumptions. You can go in there. It'll give you an overview of that. And indeed, if you want to go further, we have published a white paper on this, which will go into much more detail on the way the model has been built up. And then there will be some practical examples from different raw materials, different applications, etc., that you can again key into. So once you enter that site, all of this information will be available to you. So I hope that gives everybody a good insight and overview and understanding of how the calculator works, what information you can get out of it, the way we built it up. And I suppose, I believe that's probably our last slide, Amanda. So I think we can maybe hand back to Dan and our adjudicators there and see if we've any further questions or open up the conversation.
All right. Well, first, thank you both for the presentation, as well as your dog, Eoin. That was quite entertaining. It's the first time we've had a dog on the webinar. So, I was cracking up in the background here. So, all right. So let's move on to the Q&A. Bring you guys both back on, and we can get started here. We got a couple questions. So let's start off. First question is, my brewery is not that big. Can I really benefit from using these ingredients in my process?
Eoin, what do you think?
I might. Yeah, well, I mean, we have built the model back, as I said, to, as you can see, the model goes down to 10,000 barrels. So I would say in reality, yes, it depends on how relevant those numbers and how ambitious you are about that. But the simple message I would say is these technologies always have a positive impact in terms of the process. And how I would always view that is that if a barrel of beer has we'll say a carbon footprint of 10 tons or whatever, and that number is way high, but whatever, if we just say 10, even if I can be reducing that by 1, 2, or 3%, it's a positive contribution. As I said, you know, as we exist at the moment and what customers perceive. So I would say, you know, I always say if you're going to eat an elephant, it's one spoonful at a time. If we're tackling this carbon footprint issue or global warming, it's going to be all of these small steps that are going to add up to deliver the final benefit. And so I don't believe that any operation is too small.
Yeah, I'd agree with that too. And
sorry,
even,
I'm just going to let him out.
No problem, Eoin. I'd agree with that too. And even looking at the example, you know, 13 cars taken off the road per year, you know, if you figure your brewery is around for 15, 20 years, you know, and if you're consistently making that impact year over year, that adds up. Likewise, you know, if there are other craft brewers that kind of follow your example, because I think right now with sustainability, you know, we're looking at what's on the market and we're looking at what other brands or companies are doing, and there's no one right answer, and there's no, you know, one area that everyone is focused on. but impacts add up. And I think everyone's kind of looking to each other for example. So we all kind of have to put our stake in the ground and say, this is where we're going to start, and this is what we're going to try to impact, and then continue to try to, kind of add on to that each year. And if we're all kind of making our little impact in our corner of the world, it definitely makes a big difference when you look at it collectively.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it was the small things that got us to things like global warming, and it's the small
Absolutely.
things that'll help, in the future. So, all right. So next question, is there cost savings when using these more sustainable ingredients in my process?
I think there definitely can be. I mean, and again, we've seen COVID impact, especially in this past year, and food service taking such a hit that everyone is probably, or at least should be, looking for ways to improve their process, not only from an environmental standpoint, but also from a cost efficiency standpoint, in order to impact their bottom line as well. Eoin, I don't know if you've got your dog situated and you're able to chime in on that one. We've also got Deborah Waters, one of our colleagues from Kerry. She's a subject matter expert.
I mean, I would say,
Owen, you're roboting a little bit. I think what everybody really wants to hear is what the dog thinks, but you're going to have to put up with me instead. So there really are cost savings. Obviously, when you buy and use a new ingredient, you have to pay a certain amount per pound. But the on cost of purchasing these ingredients and using them in your brewery is absolutely more than offset by the savings that you make in reduction of raw material costs, the increased efficiencies, so more throughput, lower use of filter aid, throwing out less filter aid, getting far longer runs in. If you're close to capacity in your brewery, you can have a higher capacity per run, so you bring down the overall overheads and costs, which can be really, really important when you're talking about a process, whether that's a large process or a smaller process. All of these things add up. And I suppose Amanda's comment about if you're doing this over a number of years, all these little bits really do make a huge difference. And these you can feel good, I suppose, about making these changes without having that added cost. And in fact, quite the opposite, you're making quite a bit of savings to the bottom line as well for yourself, and hopefully improving profitability overall for your business. So it's a win-win, really. It's a win for the customer. It's a nice, great story for them to tell. It's a great feeling.
And if I could add to that, the irony is really, guys, when I was building this model and when I looked at it, if you look at how these models operate, as with all cases, it's economies of scale. So the irony is that, at the larger brewery size, your energy inputs per barrel or per hectoliter are significantly lower than your energy and other inputs per barrel when you're a smaller operation. So the reality is that you can have a bigger impact with these technologies at a smaller level, because I remember when I first started building the model, when I was looking at the average energy input per kilowatt hours per hectoliter for a 10 million barrel brewery was somewhere of the order of 115, whereas when I went to the other level, down to maybe 100,000 barrels, we were now suddenly up at about 250. So you can see, if anything, the impact can be much more significant at a smaller level. We may be talking about smaller numbers, but in terms of that percentage impact, in terms of that CO2 per glass of beer, it can be much higher and much more significant the smaller the operation is.
Yeah, that kind of segues nicely into the next question, which is, we have a unitank. Will these ingredients work in my brewery?
Deborah, Eoin, you want to tackle that one?
Yeah,
absolutely. Yeah, if I take that one, yeah, absolutely. And again, I suppose the benefit that anybody listening in and talking to us here now gets is the fact that, we have been in this business for the best part of, personally, 35 odd years. So in that time, we've worked in many different operations throughout the world, multi-tank, unitank. Indeed, I've worked in operations where we go from a unitank system, cylindroconical to horizontal. So in all of these cases, we've optimized and we can draw on knowledge and experience where we've optimized depending on the operation. So, for example, I can give you a very interesting example where we looked at anti-foam consumption and anti-foam optimization. And it was really interesting in one brewery. It was a particular brand. In one operation, it was produced in a cylindroconical, whereas in another operation, it was produced in a horizontal fermenter. And in that particular example, we were looking at optimizing the dose rate of the firm cap and getting the most out of it, because the critical element there was, if you can imagine, same volume of beer, but if you suddenly flip the tank on its side, the surface area in terms of what you're dealing with now is very different to what it was in a horizontal cylindroconical tank as opposed to a vertical cylindroconical tank. So it's an unusual example, but we could see there how we optimize the same technology in two different operations. So that's a roundabout way of saying, yeah, when it comes to a unitank operation, yeah, we definitely have the experience, knowledge, you can use the technology, and certainly we can support people with that, you know.
Yeah, and to add to that, you know, us at BSG, if any of you customers out there, you know, if you have questions, you know, want to have the best kind of methods to using some of these products, we're here to help with that as well. So, you know, getting a hold of anyone in sales, they'll definitely be able to walk you through, help you with bench trials, things like that. So, you know, we're all here to support everyone on the other end. So, all right. Let's move on to the next question. Do I need to change any processes to improve my sustainability?
So I think, Owen, you already answered probably a lot of that in your last example. And I think that the thing is that it doesn't really matter what your process is. All of these different brewing processes, we've looked at all of these ingredients. You optimize the dose rate, or you change the way you use it slightly, and you get this. You can get really good benefits across all these different processes. And as you mentioned, Dan, there's great information on your site how to use these ingredients well and how to get the best benefit out of them. So I suppose, yeah, if there's a specific situation or scenario that's maybe a little bit unusual or a different process than a traditional brewing process, ask about it, and yeah, give us a challenge. Owen would love to get another challenging scenario where he can go from his cylindroconical flask, I was going to say, to your horizontal version. So whatever you have, throw it at us, and I'm pretty sure we can come up with a solution for you guys.
Sure.
I would also add to that, maybe, you know, thinking about the marketing process, of course, you know, if you're trying to make efficiencies in your brewing process, and hopefully you're quantifying the impact that you're having. If not, you should definitely start trying to track that. But again, also the importance of passing that message along to the consumer, because we know it's important to them. 89% of consumers expect that brands and companies are making sustainable efforts in today's market. And it helps them make smart choices too. So if they can choose your craft brew or your brewery or your products over one that's maybe less sustainably produced or has you know, a less positive impact on the environment, then that's kind of a win-win for the planet and a win-win for all of us as well.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, let's keep moving. We got more questions.
If I could add to that, and maybe it's not so much changing the process. Sorry, John, if I could add to that from Amanda, it's not so much changing the process, but maybe it's more changing the way you think about the process and the way you measure the process.
Exactly.
Yeah, that's a great point. All right. Next up, do I need to invest in any equipment to improve sustainability?
All I would say there, and then I'll hand over to Deborah, is that, you know, in terms of do I need to invest, it has always been one of the strongest messages that we've given out to customers, is that, you know, if I look at most of these technologies, they're, if you like, designed to improve yields and efficiencies within existing operations, to that point to specifically avoid capex or having to invest to increase output. So this is why we've been working on these and been quite successful with these technologies, so that in many regards, it's the very reason you're using them or can use them is to give the example of improving or reducing the fermentation time or increasing the fermentation capacity by using an antifoam, that is actually increasing your volume without having to increase in new tank capacity. So they are designed actually to fit into the existing processes and deliver the efficiencies that way.
Yeah, absolutely agree on. And I suppose from the point of view of investment, the only investment you need to make is what Amanda said, really step back, look at your process, start to track where you have bottlenecks or where you think you can make improvements, start to think about the raw materials you're using. If you can reduce the malt, use some adjuncts, if you can get better capacity in your tanks by using antifoam or whatever it is. There are so many different ways, improving your alcohol yield, all these different things. If you can step back, invest a little bit of your time to think about your process, track your numbers, see where you are right now, then you can really, really measure the difference by looking at some of these ingredients and just adding it to your existing process, without making any other changes, without having to really overthink the process. A lot of the optimization is already there. As Dan said, look at the BSG website. There's a huge amount of information about how to use and add these ingredients, and a lot of that work is already done. So the only investment is you looking at your process and deciding where you think you can improve it.
Yeah. Now, one thing that would be good to touch on, and you guys can kind of get more detailed into it, but do these products work in distilleries?
Yeah, if I can take that one, Dan, what I would say is that if we look at the distilling process, essentially, if you will, the front end of the distilling process is essentially a brewing process. We're taking in grain, we're mashing it, and we're trying to get as much extract as possible out of that. So if we think of if you like, if we're adding an enzyme technology into a mash that contains either 100% malt or a mixture of malt and barley, or malt and corn or whatever. I mean, that enzyme technology, for want of a better word, it doesn't know if it's in a brewery or a distillery. All it knows is that, hold on, there's nice carbohydrate or nice beta-glucan, or there's non-starch polysaccharides here. It's the right temperature, it's the right pH. I just need to break these down. That's what I'm going to do. So it's going to work regardless. And then, your downstream processes, yes, they are slightly different. We won't have a filtration clarification process that we do have, obviously, in the brewing industry. But what we do have is we have working with some very large global distilleries who are using antifoam to control the foam height that's developed in their fermenters and increase the overall efficiency utilization of those tanks. So as I said, regardless of the environment, if you like, the chemistry, the biochemistry, the technology is going to behave as it's designed to behave. And as I said, it's not a ton or a distillery fermenter or whatever. So yeah, it will. Not all of the technologies, clearly, when we look at things like some of the clarification aids, things like that, when we're going in a distilling process, we don't really need to remove the yeast. We're not going to be filtering out the grain. But the enzymes that improve extract yield in a brewing environment will deliver the same extract yield, hopefully, in a distilling environment. And antifoam, all antifoam is going to do is collapse foam, whether it's in a brewery fermenter or a distillery fermenter. So again, yeah, not all the technologies, but certainly quite a number of them will apply.
Excellent. All right. So one last question. I think this is more towards you, Amanda. But, with brewers, creating beers that are motivated to at the taste of beer or the popular styles of beers out there, can you talk a little bit about how sustainability is really important as well for customers and consumers in the region?
Yeah, so I think, as I mentioned before, and we're looking at that and consumer, the consumer that is, increasingly making and expecting more and more from the craft brews that they're drinking, and really the everyday foods and beverages that they're drinking. it's not really a differentiator anymore. It's kind of a must-have for consumers. So I think, as Deborah mentioned, and we've mentioned before, looking at your process, assessing the efficiencies that you have and the impact that you're making today, looking at where you can improve that, and then publicizing that story for the end consumer. I think it really increases the value of your brand and the value of your product. And as a result, consumers might be willing to pay a little bit more, because I think the craft brew drinker really values those premium ingredients. So if you're, sourcing locally, for instance, but maybe you're not even publicizing that, definitely call that out. I think that's something that a consumer would definitely be interested in. And especially, and even tourists, as we all kind of get back out there and maybe take some vacations, travel or taste exploration is a taste trend that we're seeing globally, really. So consumers are looking for those authentic experiences, and it can be as simple as, an authentic experience to that region of the US, or even in Canada or anywhere across the globe. So I think, looking at, of course, what's first and foremost true to your brand, and then kind of the ways that you can kind of up the ante for that taste experience, but also use more premium ingredients and call that out. And then I think, if you're calling out the impact that your brewing process or this product has on the environment, or you've got really cool recyclable packaging, I think that's really kind of the whole package that end consumer is looking for.
Yeah, I mean, you even mentioned like New Belgium in your presentation, and they really lean into that message, and it's a positive message. There's nothing negative about doing things like that. So
absolutely,
it's encouraging. So,
mm-hmm.
All right, well, that's all we have for questions. So again, if anybody does have any further questions, you can send them to info@bsgcraft.com. You send us the email and we'll get those questions directed to the people that would be best to answer them. And also like to remind everyone that past webinars are under BSG Craft on YouTube. And to remember to look for new episodes via newsletter, social media, our website, or just ask a customer sales representative and they should be able to help you. So again, I'd like to thank you all. Amanda, Eoin, your dog, Deborah. Thanks for joining us today. Always appreciate everything you guys do for us, and I love working with you guys. So thanks for all your help on this webinar.
Likewise.
Yep. Thank you, Dan and
team.
team.
Great.
All right.
Absolutely. And apologies again on behalf of myself and my dog.
No problem.
We loved it.
Yeah, what's your dog's name so we can, okay.
Socks.
Perfect.
All right. Well, thanks again, guys, and thanks for everyone for joining us. We'll be back with more webinars soon. All right. Cheers.